welcome back to Discover the Wonders. So today we are talking about boomerangs. So when you throw a boomerang, it comes back to you. So we're going to learn how our actions can be like boomerangs. So last week I told the story about Jacob when he had to run away from home for his own safety. But as he traveled, he had an encounter with God. When he slept, he had a dream where God talked to him and gave him a very special promise. So now he is continuing on his journey, and he's going to go to the family of his mother. So Rebecca's family. So he's got to travel a long way, but God has promised to be with him in spite of the wrong things that Jacob has done. So he gets near to the town where his mum came from, and he came to the well just outside of town, and there were some shepherds there. So he started talking to the shepherds, and he said, "Do you know Laban?" And they said, "Oh, yep, we know him, and his daughter will be coming along anytime soon." And so before long, Laban's daughter, Rachel, came along, and she was a very beautiful girl to look at. And she had some sheep and goats, and she was bringing them to the well to get some water for them. And so Jacob put the stone away from the well, and he helped her get some water for her animals. And he told her who he was. So they were relatives. And so she took him back home, and he began to live with them, with his family. And he started to work for Laban. He started to help out since he was there. And after a while, Laban said, "You've been doing a lot of work here. I really should pay you." Now, Jacob said, "I don't really want to be paid, but there is something I really want." So he had fallen in love with Rachel, and he really wanted to marry her. And remember, he had kind of gone there to find a wife. And so he says, "I want to marry Rachel. I will work for you for 7 years without wages if you will give me Rachel as my wife." Now, that's a long time to work and to have to wait to be married, 7 years. But Laban said, "Okay, yep." Now he agreed to it. And so Jacob started to work. And he loved Rachel so much that 7 years didn't seem that long to work. Now, remember what Jacob has done in the past. He's kind of tricked his brother twice, and our actions are like boomerangs. So he threw out the boomerang of tricking and being deceitful. Now that boomerang is going to come back and hit him. So the time comes for him to marry Rachel. And so they started having their wedding celebration. And back then they did things a lot differently, because I don't think this would have happened in our normal weddings today. So it was the end of the day. It was dark. And Laban brought his daughter to Jacob to be married. But he brought her to her at night after they had had the wedding celebrations. And so it was dark, and most likely she might have had a veil over her face. They went to bed. In the morning, when it's not dark anymore, Jacob realizes he has been tricked. He goes to look at his wife in the morning, and it is not Rachel. So Laban had 2 daughters. Rachel was the younger one. Leah was the older one. And when Jacob woke up in the morning, it was Leah there and not Rachel. And he was very upset and angry because Laban had said he could marry Rachel. And now Laban's given him his other daughter, her sister, Rachel's sister. And so Jacob is really angry and upset, and he finds Laban and he says, "Why did you do this to me? You promised me Rachel. I worked 7 years for Rachel, and you've given me Leah." And Laban said, "Oh, Leah's the oldest one, and she should get married first. Rachel can't get married first." Now, what a cruel thing to do. But, Jacob's kind of reaping what he sowed. He tricked other people, and now he's starting to know a little bit what it feels like. You know, both Jacob and Laban needed to learn a verse from the New Testament in the Bible. Jesus taught the golden rule, and that says, treat other people how you want to be treated, or do to others what you want them to do to you. But they didn't. They did what they wanted to do. They didn't treat people how they would like to be treated. And so Jacob was very upset, and he was getting angry at Laban. And Laban said, oh, it's okay. You can still have Rachel if you work for another 7 years. Now, what he was saying was that Jacob could have both of them, both Leah and Rachel. Now, that seems really strange to us today, but in those days, it was a normal thing in the culture then to have more than one wife. But, of course, it caused so many problems, as we will see in this story as well, because there's going to be a lot of jealousy, a lot of fights, and a lot of problems. And when God made the first couple, it was one man and one woman, and that is the best way. But now Jacob, even though it wasn't his plan, now he's ended up with 2 wives, 2 sisters. So he is not happy about that, but he does agree to work another 7 years for Rachel. So now he has 2 wives, and his actions have been like a boomerang that have come back and hit him. So I'm going to sing a little song called Your Actions Are Like Boomerangs. Your actions are like boomerangs. What you do comes back to you. Your actions are like boomerangs. They come right back again. Your actions are like boomerangs. What you do comes back to you. Your actions are like boomerangs. They come right back again. And another song, it is called the Boomerang Song. And this song talks about how the wrong things we do are like a boomerang. And if we try to hide what the wrong things we do, then it will come back and find us, just like a boomerang. When I go out to throw a boomerang as far as I can see, after beginning and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning, it always comes back to me. It always comes back to me. Did you know sin is like a boomerang? There's never any doubt. Though you're deciding on running and hiding and running and hiding and running and hiding, your sin will be finding, your sin will be finding, your sin will be finding you out. Aha! When I go out to throw a boomerang as far as I can see, after beginning and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning and spinning, it always comes back to me. It always comes back to me. Did you know sin is like a boomerang? There's never any doubt. Though you're deciding on running and hiding and running and hiding and running and hiding, your sin will be finding, your sin will be finding, your sin will be finding you out. Aha! So our actions are like boomerangs. So the wrong things we do, but also the good things we do are also like boomerangs. So there is a Bible verse that says, the merciful or the kind man doeth good to his own soul, but he that is cruel troubleth his own flesh. So when we throw the boomerang of kindness, when we have kind actions, then we do good to ourselves. But when we're cruel, we hurt ourselves. So I'm going to sing you this verse. The merciful man doeth good to his own soul, but he that is cruel troubleth his own flesh. The merciful man doeth good to his own soul, but he that is cruel troubleth his own flesh. The merciful man doeth good to his own soul, but he that is cruel troubleth his own flesh. The merciful man doeth good to his own soul, but he that So kindness is like a boomerang. I can remember one Christmas, I really tried to make Christmas a special time for other people. So me and my children, we made like shape biscuits and we decorated them. We put them in little bags and we put a little card on there and we went and delivered them to some older, lonely people that we knew. And then there was another lady that we knew who didn't have any family in the area, and we knew that she was going to be a bit lonely at Christmas. So we asked her if we could go and visit her on Christmas Day. And the reason we wanted to was to make it special for her. So we were throwing the boomerang of kindness. But I remember at the end of that Christmas Day thinking, we are the ones who had a really special Christmas. So we had visited this old lady, but she had done her best to make it special for us. So she'd like put on this little feast for us with little treats. And so it was very special for us, even though we were trying to make it special for her. And then somebody also invited us for dinner on Christmas Day as well. And they cooked for us and they spoiled us as well. And I went home thinking, we tried to be kind to others, and yet we are the ones who have been spoiled. So it is really true that when we throw the boomerang of kindness, it does come back to us in one way or another, and we're the ones who end up better off. Now, I'm going to read you a story because giving can also be like a boomerang. We give to others, and the Bible says if we give, it will be given to us. So this is a story. It is a true story, but I wrote it for one of my books, so I'm going to read it out of the book. It is called Not Enough Tickets. In 1892 at Stanford University, an 18-year-old student didn't have enough money to pay his school fees. He was an orphan and didn't know what to do. But he came up with a good idea. Together with a friend, they decided to put on a musical concert at the university. They asked a great Polish pianist, Ignacy J. Paderewski, to play at the concert. The pianist's manager agreed if they would be paid $2,000. The boys agreed and began to work to make the concert a success. The day of the concert came. Paderewski performed at Stanford. But the boys hadn't sold enough tickets and they only had 1,600. Not enough to even pay Paderewski. They were very disappointed and explained what had happened to the pianist. They gave him the $1,600 as well as a check for $400. But Paderewski wouldn't accept it. He ripped up the check and gave the money back to the boys. Use this money to pay for whatever you have spent on the concert and then to pay for your school fees. Give me whatever is left, he said generously. The boys were very surprised and extremely thankful. Later on, Paderewski became the Prime Minister of Poland. When the World War began, Poland was in trouble. There was not enough food and people were starving. Paderewski didn't know what to do, but he turned to the U.S. Food and Relief Administration for help. The man in charge was a man called Herbert Hoover, who later became the U.S. president. He kindly agreed to help and quickly shipped tons of grain to feed the starving people. Many lives were saved. One day, Paderewski met Hoover in person and thanked him. But Hoover said, "You don't need to thank me. You might not remember me, but several years ago, you helped 2 students go through college in the U.S. I was one of them." The Bible says, "Give, and it shall be given unto you. Good measure, pressed down and shaken together and running over shall man give into your bosom. For with the same measure that you mete, withal it shall be measured to you again." Giving is like bouncing a ball. What we give comes back to us in some way. It is hard to give, but God does bless us when we do. We shouldn't give because we want others to give to us, but to share what God has given us. So, giving is like a boomerang. So also is a smile. When we smile at others, they often smile back. And I'm going to sing a little song which I learned when I was a child called "A Smile is Something That You Give It Away." A smile is something that you give it away. You give it away, you give it away. A smile is something that you give it away, and it comes right back to you. A smile is like a golden penny. Hold on tight and you won't get any. Lend it, spend it, give it away, and it comes right back to you. So, the good things we do, the kind things we do are like a boomerang, but also the wrong things we do too. Now, I'm going to tell you a story which is called the boomerang. So, this was on New Year's Eve, and often on New Year's Eve, people like to do something special. Some people like to party. And there was this group of guys that were in the bar at the hotel, and they were drinking, and they were being very loud and noisy. Some of them were getting drunk. And then in walked a guy called Joe. Now, Joe was known for loving alcohol and hating any kind of religion. So he walks in and he says, "Hey guys, down at the church, they're having a meeting. Why don't we have a meeting here too?" So some churches have special meetings on New Year's Eve, but he's wanting to pretend to have a service just to mock them and to have some fun. So he says, "Hey, Elridge, you lead us in a prayer." And so Elridge is a new guy in town. He's a barber. So he doesn't really know many people, and he wants everybody to like him. So he does what Joe tells him to. He's also someone who is very good at talking. So he gets down on his knees and he pretends in a silly voice to say a prayer. And then Joe says, "Okay, everybody, now we're going to sing a song." And so Joe starts singing a hymn, but he puts in his own words, and some of them were very bad words. And so he's singing the song and he's making a mockery of Christians and people who go to church. And so everybody else starts joining in and they think it's funny. And then Joe points to one guy whose name was Samuel. Now Samuel, he had grown up as a minister's son. So Samuel's dad was a preacher in a church. Samuel had grown up going to church, but when he was older, he turned his back on it. And now Joe says to him, "Samuel, you're going to preach us a sermon." Now, because of Samuel's upbringing, he says, "I'm not doing that." And they said, "Oh, yes, you are." And Samuel said, "I am not doing that." And he tried to get out of the room, but the guys wouldn't let him. They grabbed him and they said, "You're going to preach to us or you're going to buy us all drinks." Now, Samuel didn't have enough money to buy them all drinks. And so he said, "Okay." He said, "But I don't have a verse to preach from." And so Joe gave him a verse. So Joe must have known a little bit from the Bible. He gave him a verse. He said, "The spirit is willing, but the flesh is weak." Now, that means that we may want to do what's right, but we don't always have the strength to do it. And so Samuel, he starts talking and he starts preaching about this verse. And Joe looks at him and Joe says, "I think he really means what he's saying." And all the other guys start watching and listening too. And Samuel, as he starts talking about this verse, all the things that he learned as a child and heard his dad say, learned in Sunday school, they all started coming back into his mind. And he started saying these things that he remembered. And as he said it, he knew that it was true. And he thought, if this is really true, then I need to get down on my knees and ask God to forgive me for my sin. And so remember, this is a service, which is a mockery. These guys are just having fun, making fun of other people. Samuel gets down on his knees and very seriously starts asking God to forgive him for his sins. And two other guys joined him. They also became very serious and they asked God to forgive their sins as well. Now, Joe is watching in shock. He'd thrown a boomerang of mocking and making fun of Christians, and now 3 of the guys have become Christians. 3 of the guys have knelt down and asked God to forgive them for their sins. Now, Joe also went home a little bit different. He didn't ask God to forgive him, but nobody ever heard him make fun of Christians again because his boomerang had come back and hit him. I think that's a really neat story. Now I'm going to tell you another story about 2 boys who played a trick at school, and this trick also boomeranged. So one day at school, they got told that they were having a reliever. Now, for some reason, kids like to play up when there's relievers, when it's not the usual teacher. So Tom and Robert thought, what's a trick that we could play on this new teacher? So they came up with one. They thought, we can swap seats and swap names. So one of the boys was Tom and the other one was Robert. So they swapped places. So Tom sat at Robert's desk and Robert sat at Tom's desk. Now, the teacher doesn't know any of the kids, so she's not going to know. So they think this is great fun to play this trick on this new teacher. Now, the new teacher was very young and she was very beautiful, and all the kids thought she was really nice and really neat. And Tom and Robert played their trick all morning. And then after lunch, the teacher, who was actually an art teacher, she said, we're going to do something a little bit different for history. Since I'm an art teacher, we're going to talk a little bit about the history of art. And so they started learning a bit about art and the history of art. And then they got into a bit of a discussion how art can be used to get a message across. So like you can draw something and you're really, like giving a message with your art. So one of the kids said, hey, I've got an idea. Why don't we all draw a picture and everybody else has got to guess what the message is in our picture? Now, the teacher thought that was a really neat idea, but she said, well, what about I'll give you an assignment. I will write 3 sentences on the board and you can all pick one of them and you can illustrate it with art. So she wrote up 3 sentences. And one of them was, I'm glad I live in America. So Tom, he picked that one. And Tom, he was having art lessons, so he was really good at drawing. So he drew a really neat picture about the American life. And his looked really good, but underneath he wrote Robert's name because they wanted to keep going with their trick. Now, Robert, he drew a picture as well, but his didn't look very good because he was not very good at drawing at all. And underneath he wrote Tom. Now, after school, when they went home, like the teacher didn't find out, but afterwards Tom said, I don't think we should have done that trick. I'm feeling a bit guilty. I want to go back and tell the teacher that we played a trick on her. And Robert said, no, don't do that. You'll just get us into lots of trouble. She'll never know. Let's just forget about it. And because it was Tom and Robert, it's a little bit hard for Tom to own up because he's kind of telling on Robert as well. So he just went home. And weeks went by, and then one day Robert got called into the principal's office. And everybody in his class was like, oh, I wonder what Robert's done. Has he done something naughty? He's in trouble with the principal. But when Robert got to the principal was really happy. And he said, Robert, I didn't know you were such a good artist. Do you take art lessons? And Robert was like, no. And he thought, oh no, what's happened here? And the principal said, do you remember we had that teacher one day, that reliever, and you guys did an art assignment? Well, that teacher entered your picture in an art competition. It was an art contest called America for Americans. She entered your picture and it won. It won the contest. And Robert was like, what? And the principal said, and they're going to, a very important American citizen is going to come to our school, to the assembly, and they're going to present an award to you. Now, Robert felt sick because it wasn't him that had done the picture, it was Tom. So their trick was now boomeranging. And so he looked a bit sick and he didn't look very happy. And the principal was like, don't you want to be famous? And Robert said, you mean I've got to get up in front of everybody? And the principal said, yep. So at lunchtime, Tom and Robert talked to each other and Robert told him what had happened. And Tom said, look, we're caught. We've got to own up and tell what we've done. And Robert said, no, we can't. We'll just get into trouble. I'll write to the judges and tell them I don't want the award. And Tom said, no, we can't do that. We need to own up. And Robert got a bit angry and he said, look, you just want the award. You want the glory. And Tom said, there's going to be no glory. We did wrong. We lied. He said, we need to own up. And he said, I'm going to go and own up. So he went to go to the principal's office, but the principal was out, so he couldn't. On his way home from school, he was a bit upset. He didn't know what to do, but he heard somebody calling him, and it was a man driving past in the car. It was a family friend, someone that he knew. And so he started talking to this guy. He jumped in the car and the guy took him home, and he started telling him all his problems about this big mix-up, this trick that had boomeranged. And he said, what do I do? If I tell, then I'm telling on Robert. He said, but I just want to own up. I just want to be done with this. And the man said, what should you do? You would be telling on Robert if you own up. He said, why don't we pray about it? Let's pray to God and ask God to help us and ask God to make Robert willing to own up. So they prayed together, and Tom confessed his sin, what he'd done to God, and asked for God's forgiveness. Now, the next day, the teacher called Robert up to her desk and says, Robert, I heard about this award, about this competition. Now, I didn't know you were such a good artist. I thought only Tom knew how to draw like this. And then she said to Robert, Robert, could you tell me everything that was on the picture? Now, since Robert hadn't drawn the picture, he couldn't tell what was on there, and he said he was caught. He said, Tom did it. And the teacher was like, what? He said, can Tom come up here and we can explain together what happened? And so Tom came up and they confessed everything to the teacher. And so the teacher sent them into the principal, and when the principal heard what had happened, he groaned and he was very upset. He said, this award was an honor for our school, but we're going to have to tell the judges, and it's going to bring shame on our school because of what you guys have done, because of your dishonesty. And so he was not happy at all. So the boys, they had to write a few letters. They had to write to the judges and explain. They had to write a letter to the relieving teacher and apologize to her. They apologized to the class, and they had to tell their parents all about it. All this just from a little trick they had done. And so anyway, life went on. But one day, Tom got called to the principal's office, and the principal told him that he was still going to get the award, that Robert had written a letter to the judges, and because of that letter, the judges still wanted to give Tom a reward. And Tom was like, well, what did he write in the letter? And the principal said Robert had explained the story more, that Tom had wanted to own up that first afternoon, and Robert wouldn't let him. And then again and again, Tom had wanted to own up, and Robert wouldn't let him. And so he had told the judges that, Tom had wanted to own up and that he was really a good American citizen and he was a good Christian. And so Robert spoke up for Tom, and because of that, Tom did still get the award. But remember that our actions are like boomerangs. And there's one more story of a boy. And because, laziness can also be like a boomerang. Now, this boy was going with his mother and his auntie out in the woods to pick blackberries. So he had a little pail, and his mother and his auntie had bigger pails or buckets, and they were picking blueberries. But this boy couldn't really be bothered picking them. He just wanted to have a nice pie full of blueberries, but he didn't want to pick them. So instead, he chased butterflies and played hide and seek with a squirrel and just mucked around. And then it was nearly time to go. And because he's not where his mother can see him because he's in the woods. And when he realizes it's nearly time to go, he quickly, because he hardly had any blueberries, so he quickly picked some and then he filled it up. Well, first he put moss and then he put a few blueberries on top. So it looked like the bucket was full of blueberries, but mostly it was full of moss. So, but because it looked like it was full of blueberries, when he showed his mum and his aunt, they were like, oh, well done, you picked lots of blueberries. And so they went home and his mum started cooking blueberry pies. And she made one especially for him. And it looked so nice and so yummy. and he couldn't wait to eat it. But you know what? When he bit into it, his laziness had boomeranged, and most of his pie was filled with moss, because his mum had seen what he'd done and thought that she would teach him a little lesson. And he learned that laziness is like a boomerang. If you're going to be lazy, it's going to come back to you. So our actions are like boomerangs. The wrong things we do come back to us, but also the good and the right things we do, like kindness and a smile, those things come back to us. And giving, those things come back to us as well. So let's confess the wrong things we've done to God and ask for his help to do things that are right and to throw good boomerangs.